This civilization did not see death as an end, it turned it into a goal. The story of the Nile Desert. Silent, vast, and unforgiving, yet through this silence flowed a vein that carried life for thousands of years. The Nile River. Each year, its flooding waters brought not only fertility, but civilization itself. As people began to gather around this river, they unknowingly laid the foundations of one of the longest-lasting civilizations in history. Time flowed differently on these lands, because here, people did not build merely to live, but to last forever. The land of god-kings. In Egypt, ruling was not an ordinary duty. Pharaohs were not seen by the people as mere kings, but as the earthly representatives of the gods. The pharaoh was the guarantor of order. If the pharaoh was powerful and just, the Nile would flood, the harvest would be abundant, and the land would live in peace. If order was broken, chaos was inevitable. For this reason, obedience to the pharaoh was not born of fear, but of a cosmic necessity. Writing, order, and the state. Such a vast order could not stand by chance. The Egyptians carved their thoughts into stone. Hieroglyphs were not merely a form of writing, they were memory itself. Taxes were recorded, storehouses were counted, workers were organized. The flooding of the Nile was known, and agriculture was planned accordingly. What emerged was one of the world's first centralized and bureaucratic states. Power, carved in stone. The pyramid structures that still challenge the sky today. The pyramids were the quietest, yet most striking expression of Egypt's power. They were not merely tombs, they were a promise. Even if the pharaoh died, his power had to endure. His soul had to reach the stars. The flawless placement of millions of stone blocks was not only engineering, it was faith turned into stone. Death, but not the end. For the Egyptians, death was not an end. The true journey began after death. The heart was weighed, the soul faced truth. If a life had been lived justly, the gates of eternity would open. That is why bodies were mummified. Tombs were filled with possessions. Guiding texts were written on the walls, because eternity was not something to be faced unprepared. The peak of power. Over time, Egypt became more than a civilization that merely survived. It became an empire. Armies were formed. Borders expanded. Gold, slaves, and spoils flowed into the land. In this era, certain figures altered the course of history. Hatshepsut, a female pharaoh, Akhenaten, who claimed to speak with a god, and the legendary Ramses II. Egypt stood at its peak, but every peak comes at a cost. Fractures and collapse. As power grew, balance began to break. Internal revolts erupted. Priests gained influence. The authority of the pharaohs weakened. and the outside world was waiting. First the Assyrians, then the Persians, and finally Alexander the Great. Egypt was conquered, but it did not disappear, because Egypt was not merely a state, it was an idea. What remains? When we look at Egypt today, we do not see the ruins of a civilization, we see the memory of humanity itself. The stones still speak, the walls still tell stories. The pyramids remind us of this: what humans can build when they refuse to accept death. In pursuit of eternity, ancient Egypt was a civilization that tried to defeat time. And perhaps it succeeded, because even thousands of years later, we are still asking the questions they once asked. How permanent can a human be? Is power truly eternal? And death, is it really the end? If you don't want to miss these silent yet profound stories of human history, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Human History.